Well, hello. Thanks for coming back to check out another video. So, we are here today to sit down and do what I think is the second update in our chopping block series. So in case you missed it, I'm going to leave the introduction video where I showed you all of the palettes that are on my chopping block, as well as the first update where I feel like we got through quite a good bit of the palettes, had some, decisions made. So basically, it's no different than anyone else's chopping block. I just had a grouping of palettes where I was on the fence about keeping them or not. For whatever reason, I had some type of hang up about if they had a place or not in my collection, and I just thought it would be a really good idea to heavily scrutinize them and try to do 2 to 3 looks with each palette and then make a decision. So I have another round of palettes that I have made decisions about. Hopefully that sounds interesting to you guys, and I will leave this broken up by chapters just in case you're curious about one particular palette over like some of the others. Okay, so the first palette we will talk about is from Nomad Cosmetics. So this is the America's Parks palette. So this is what it looks like on the inside. Again, it's a really pretty color story. Like, I have to give it to Nomad. I really love their packaging, their theming, and their color stories. Like, I think that they do such a good job with that. I just, I had used this palette earlier in the year and I did 3 looks with it and I just wasn't super impressed with it. And so I like tucked it back away into my collection and didn't really fool or fuss with it. And then I just decided, like, you have got to try this palette again. See if you can get it to work for you. My hang up with the Nomad formula is, one, that the shimmer shadows aren't that impactful. And I know that not everyone wants like a bam in your face shimmer, but I do. And so that's what I expect from my shimmer shadows. But I guess the bigger issue with them is that the matte shadows in here, they don't layer well, and they don't layer well on top of themselves. And what you see in the pan is not necessarily what you get on your eyes. So I do have a look to show you with this palette. I did use, specifically in my crease, I remember that I used the yellow and the brown matte. Yellow and brown is a really fun color combination, I think, especially for the fall time. Like, yellow and brown, it just gives me such fall vibes. So I've used those colors together with other palettes, but using them with this palette, I feel like the brown almost turned the yellow somewhat green. It was just a really weird experience. I did not like it. Also, the brown was quite patchy and could not be built up on itself. So I couldn't get the depth that I wanted with this eye look. And within here, the brown and the purple and the green, those are like your darkest shadows. And I need that depth. Like, I want that contrast with my eye looks, And I know that I could pull in another palette to achieve like the depth and the variety that I want. But I'm at a point in my life within my palette collection where I don't mind mixing palettes, but I also want every palette within my collection to be a standalone palette. Like, I don't want to have to constantly think about it. Like, okay, well, if you want to use America's Parks, like, just remember you got to pull out this and this and this to really get it to work, I will say in this eye look, the last time that I used this palette, I did use the NYX glitter glue and applied the shimmer shades on top of that. And I feel like that did a better job. It did make them a little bit more impactful, but they still weren't my favorite formula. So after I did that eye look, I was just so unimpressed with this palette that I was like dreading having to use it again, just to come on here and say that I used it twice for you guys to show you 2 eye looks. And so I thought about it and I was like, Haley, if you are like really dreading using a palette, that's your answer. That's your answer, that you don't need it within your life. I think my biggest hang up though, because I'm sitting here and I can say all this and I know all this, and I'm going to declutter this palette. Like, it does not have a place in my collection, but I still have a hang up on wanting to keep this. And I think I have figured it out. It's because it's the America's Parks palette. Like, I grew up with a national park in my background. Like, I am an Appalachian girl, a Great Smoky Mountain girl, a Blue Ridge Parkway girl, and there is a shadow in here, and it's got a little bear on it. It's the green one. It's called Blue Ridge Parkway. So I think that this palette kind of somewhat holds like a nostalgic vibe for me just because of that. But that's silly. Like, I cannot hang on to a piece of makeup for that reason. So I'm going to pass this along, and hopefully somebody else can really enjoy this palette and get a lot of use out of it. So when I was dreading using that Nomad palette for like a second and a third time for this video, it really made me take a step back and look at the palettes that are left in on this chopping block. And there are 3 other palettes where I was kind of like, had the same feelings about, like, kind of dreading to use them. So I am going to let all 3 of these go from my collection, and I don't have any looks to do with them. I know that that makes this kind of uneventful for you guys, since I don't really have you know, things to show you, but I'm just, like I said, at that point where it's like, if you're dreading using something, do you really love it? No. So let's get into these and I'll tell you exactly why I've been dreading using them and why I just don't want to fool and fuss with them. So the first one will be from Juvia's place. So this is the Tribe palette. Now this was a favorite palette of mine for a very long time. The background of this is reflective, so I'm going to try to hold it to where it doesn't blind you guys. So yes, like I said, this was a favorite palette for a long time. I feel like this is the palette that really opened up the door for green eyeshadows for me, and I will always love it for that. However, now, as we sit here years later, I have so many green eyeshadows within my collection, and they're in formulas that I love so much more than this palette. The Juvia's Place mattes are super dry, and I can get them to work, but sometimes they're not easily blendable. Specifically this sand shade down here, which again is the darkest shade in the palette, and I really like that contrast. And so if the darkest shade in the palette isn't working for me, like, you know, it's kind of a dud palette in that sense. So, yeah, their mattes are just really super dry and can be a little finicky. Now their shimmer shadows are gorgeous, like hands down, always are top performing like shades within my collection. But I'm specifically holding on to this palette for two shimmer shades, and I don't want to be that person, you know? So it's this Cuba shade, which is the dark blue, and Coral, which is like this kind of vanilla colored shade, but it's like got a green iridescence to it. It's just a really interesting shade. I love topping them off on each other, not on each other. I love topping Coral on top of Cuba. But if I go through and look through my collection and heavily scrutinize it, I know for sure I have some dark blue shimmers, and I'm fairly certain I have some iridescent topper shades that have like a green shift to it. So at the end of the day, this is a palette that I can just let go of, remember fondly, and enjoy that it, you know, was a favorite for so long and did, like I say, open up the door for green eyeshadow. Okay, so let's talk about Menagerie Whalesong as our second one. So it's kind of along the same lines as the Tribe palette from Juvia's Place. This was one of the first like blue themed eyeshadow palettes that I got into my collection. And now, since owning this one, I have so many more blue themed eyeshadow palettes that I just like the tone and the variety and the formula of better. Specifically with this palette, I do find that it does leave some staining on my eyes, especially this little like quad of dark shades right here. Now at the end of the day, is that the worst thing in the world? No, I just go in with a cleansing balm. There's still some staining, and then if I use a micellar water, like I'm able to get it all off of there. But I know that that's what I'm going to get from this palette, and so I don't use it, you know? Like I do reach for my other blue palettes more. And then I also, the Menagerie matte formula, it's nice. It's nowhere near as drying as the Juvia's Place matte, but it is a little bit more on the drier side. And again, I just have some other matte formulas that are a little bit easier to work with and blend out. I think that the color story of this palette was the biggest reason why I was so hung up on decluttering it, because it seems like a unique color story. So I feel like a lot of times we either get monochromatic blue palettes or they have like different kinds of greens in there with them, not these like army greens that you're getting in this palette. So I feel like that's what kind of sets it apart and makes it a little bit eye-catching, because while the shades themselves aren't unique, it's the color story, like the combination of those two colors, that makes it unique. But again, if I just look through my collection as a whole, there's no like super unique shade in here that I don't already have represented within other palettes. So I am happy to let this go, pass this along to someone else who is going to get a lot of use out of it, I hope, and really enjoy it. Okay, so the Sugar Drizzle Butterfly palette. This was one, I really do like the formula of Sugar Drizzle. I think that they are really nice to work with. All of my other palettes from them I really do enjoy. And the formula of this one matches up and aligns with all of those other ones. It's just specifically that the shimmer shadows in here are really dark. And I've told you guys time and time again, I know I'm a broken record, I don't really like dark shimmer shades. I will use them like in my outer V, or I will use them and then put a topper shade on top of them. But I just typically really like the contrast in an eye look. So I like having a very dark outer corner and then a light shimmer shade. And so when you've got a palette that's predominantly dark shimmer shades, like it's just going to go super unutilized in my collection. And I don't want that. Like I want to be reaching for palettes and excited to reach for palettes, and I'm just not excited to reach for this one. So I'm going to pass this one along as well. Okay, so then that means we just have one more palette in on the chopping block. So this is from Give Me Glow. This is the Christmas Morning palette. When I open this up, I really do like this color story, even though it is a little bit more like on the neutral side of things, we'll say. It does have like this golden shade down here. However, I'm not sure. I want to try to use this shade. I want to try to do 3 looks with this. I love the shimmer formula from Give Me Glow. It's very like fold when you put it on your eyelids, and it just looks so intense and so beautiful. Now the matte shadows in this palette are a little bit on the drier side and can be a little bit fussy, kind of like with the Juvia's placemats. However, Misty has told me that Give Me Glow has updated their matte formula, and so they're a lot more like buttery now. So I'm interested to like try them out, but I have this. I want to try it out. I want to try to do 3 looks with this. So I know it's a little bit unexciting, like we only have 1 palette left, but hey, I'm happy that, you know, it's coming down to the end of the year and I only have 1 more palette to make a decision on, because that was kind of my soft goal, was to get this done before the end of the year. That way I could go into 2023, which is kind of weird to think about, with a fresh start. So hopefully you guys found this video enjoying. I will probably, I don't know how long it'll take me to accomplish like 3 looks with this palette. Let me know if you're interested in seeing a 3 looks 1 palette video with this, since we're approaching like the Christmas season. But either way, once I make a decision on this, I will update you guys, and then that'll wrap it up for this chopping block series. So I appreciate you so much for being here and sticking around and making it till the end and putting up with my shenanigans, my rantings, and my ravings. Hope you're having a good day, a good night, or a good whatever, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye.